Welcome to the Christianity in Business podcast with host Darren Shear, an initiative of the Archie W. Dunham College of Business at Houston Baptist University. This is the show that helps Christian business leaders to integrate biblical values into business. You can get more information about the HBU Center for Christianity in Business and sign up to receive free access to all 5 issues of the Christian Business Review Journal by visiting our website at christianityinbusiness.com.
Today we'll be discussing the defining moments of a leader, and we're joined by Dave Sanderson. And just to set the scene here, I'm sitting here landlocked. You know, this is a Houston Baptist University podcast, so many of you are familiar with what's happening. If you've been watching the news or been on social media, you know our city of Houston and the Texas coast, Louisiana coast are literally getting dumped on with trillions of gallons of water. And so I'm sitting here landlocked. The only way out of my neighborhood is by boat, which I don't have. Actually, probably every boat in this area has been put in the service of rescuing those who need to be rescued. And this Hurricane Harvey is expected to be the costliest natural disaster in the history of the United States and has already set a record for the highest amount of rainfall in the history of the U.S. So as we get started here, I just want to encourage you to please continue to remember our area in your prayers. And Grace Church here in Houston is my home church and is currently a shelter for hundreds of evacuees. And you can hear about what's going on there at grace.one, and you can also contribute there. And fortunately, the floodwaters haven't reached inside my house, and I do have electricity to do this interview, so I figured one of the most helpful things I could do, at least until I can get to some of the shelters around here, would be to spread some awareness about the need here in Houston and to interview a person who can teach us some valuable lessons about viewing adverse circumstances as defining moments in our leadership journeys. So our guest interview today is with Dave Sanderson. You probably remember when Sully landed. It was depicted in a movie with Tom Hanks where he landed a commercial jet and all of its passengers safely in the frigid Hudson River in New York City back in 2009 after its engines failed as a result of a bird strike, which, if you're not familiar, is when a bird goes into the engine and just seizes it up. And that event was called the Miracle on the Hudson. And our guest today was the last person off of that airplane after he helped everyone else get to safety. And despite the hazards to himself, Dave thought only of helping others and emerged from that wreckage with the mission of encouraging others to do the right thing. And in his book, Moments Matter, he details this close encounter with death and teaches how one defining moment can create a lifetime of purpose. So Dave, welcome to the Christianity in Business podcast.
Well, Darren, thank you for having me today. I'm blessed to be here with you.
And you're doing a lot of work with the Red Cross as well, which certainly is setting up shelters all over this area. And we're going to hear a little bit more about that in just a little bit because you are one of their spokesmen. And with what you've been through, you certainly have the credibility to know what to do in the midst of a disaster. So take us to the place where you were sitting on that U.S. Airways flight 1549 on January the 15th, 2009. What was the Miracle on the Hudson like from your perspective?
Well, thank you, Darren. First place, I wasn't supposed to be on that flight. I was scheduled to be on the 5 o'clock flight because I always, in business, I would always schedule the last flight out because you never know how the day is going to turn out. And I was end of a 3-day business trip starting in Sarasota, Florida, going to Petersburg, Virginia, and ending up in Brooklyn, New York. So we were working the last day in a distribution center in Brooklyn, which opened up at 2 o'clock in the morning. So we started our day at 5 o'clock in the morning because we wanted to be right in the middle of all the action of what goes on in a distribution center because that's where pretty much all the shipments start coming in the middle of the night. So we got done at 10 o'clock that morning. So any chance to get home to my wife and my 4 kids a little early, I usually try to take advantage of that. So at 10 o'clock that morning, I called the travel agent, work with her, and she put me on flight 1549. So I gave up a first class seat at 5 o'clock for seat 15A on 1549, but nothing extraordinary about the day. It was 11 degrees and snowing, and but it's not unusual for New York in the middle of winter. And I was one of the first set of passengers to board the plane because I was a chairman. I was top tier at U.S. Airways. So I went back to my seat and did exactly what I did every single time when I got on a plane then. And I tell you, I hallucinate what they do on a plane now. And I went back to my seat, put my briefcase down, put my wallet in the briefcase, pulled the magazine out, and I started to read. I didn't listen to the flight crew, and I didn't pay attention to instructions. So, I was a typical passenger who thought they knew everything by not paying attention. But about 60 to 70 seconds after we took off is when I heard an explosion on the plane, and it was a loud explosion, which caught my attention. So I looked up and I looked out the window, and I saw fire coming out from beneath the left wing. So I knew something had happened, but I fly so often, I thought plane lost an engine. No big deal. It really didn't startle me too much at that moment. But see, that's where I think God's grace entered for the first moment on this flight, because no one knew at that moment in time what happened on the left side of the plane where I was sitting also happened on the right side of the plane at the same exact moment. See, it usually would happen, boom, boom, but the birds hit it simultaneously. So everybody heard this one explosion on the plane, so everybody thought, oh, we got another engine. No big deal. And I really think that contributed to how the passengers reacted on the plane, because I truly believe if they would have cross-referenced and checked in, people could have started panicking. People panic, people lose their heads. But no one lost their heads. And I think that was one part of the saving grace of what happened inside the plane that day.
So now the plane had just taken off, correct?
60 to 70 seconds about after it took off is when the bird struck. That's correct.
Yeah, so you're just kind of settling in for the flight, and you're just expecting we're going up and up and up, and all of a sudden boom boom. So people weren't panicking. You didn't. I mean, were they? I would think people were gasping. I mean, what was that like? And what were you doing? Like, what was going through your head?
Well, first it was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. I don't think anybody really put two and two together because, like I said, no one was talking, so no one said, "Hey, what happened on your side of the plane? What happened on the other side of the plane?" So I think that was a major thing. Plus, the passenger makeup of the plane was primarily business people coming out of New York. So roughly 90+% of the people on the plane were business people, so who pretty much are into themselves, who can handle things themselves. So they didn't, no one really panicked. I didn't panic. I thought the plane lost an engine until the guy next to me elbowed me and said, "Hey, man, what's going on?" And I said, "I think he's going back to LaGuardia," because I felt him banking. I thought he was just turning around and going back to the airport, but I didn't know he was banking to go down the Hudson River. Because I think that as soon as he crossed over the George Washington Bridge, and he only cleared the bridge by roughly 400 feet, and the bridge is roughly 600 feet up. So at that moment, he was somewhere between 900 and 1,000 feet descending. And at that point, when the captain said brace for impact, is when I think, not only that I think, and I think everybody else in the plane thought this is not going to turn out well, because we're heading straight towards the Hudson River.
Yeah, I can remember on the movie when the flight attendants were just, going through their procedures, telling everybody, brace, brace, brace. I mean, do you hear those words kind of playing back in your mind? Gosh, like even just watching the movie, like I think about that pretty often.
Yeah, that, I there were things that trigger that. And it's definitely when I saw the movie, that's when I started getting emotional. I think when I was watching the movie is when I heard that command, because it just resonated so quickly with me, because that's exactly what I heard on the plane is brace, 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 heads down, stay down.
Wow. And then take us through those next few moments to making impact.
So as we crossed over the river, or crossed over the bridge towards the river, I prayed. And one of the things I prayed to God to forgive my sins. I don't want anything between God and me at this point. We're going down, and I want to go up, and it ain't looking good right now for me. But once I said that final prayer, I put my head down, and I tell people. And what's interesting, I tell people is I had a friend from our church who survived the earthquake in Haiti, which happened the following year. And she was in one of the buildings, and she got out and didn't get home for a few days later. But she and I sort of traded stories on that last moment when you think you're not going to make it. You're going down, and it's like, okay, this is it. My last moment of life, what's going to happen? And she and I had a very similar circumstance where we both saw the movies of our lives pass before our eyes. Things that I saw when I was a child and growing up and marrying and babies being born. And, I tell people the clarity you have in that final moment when you think you're going to die is when you find out what your purpose in life is. And all of a sudden it sort of comes to you. And it not only happened for me, but it happened to this lady likewise in the rubble and the earthquake in Haiti. So the last moment was, it was roughly 60 to 70 seconds after he crossed over the bridge until impact into the river. It was so much clarity. I saw things, and it's like everything slows down. You only have 60 seconds, but everything is so slow motion because you're seeing things with clarity.
Wow. So now, once you landed, was it long after that before you really? I mean, what point did the hope kick in that, you know what, I think we're gonna get out of this?
Well, when we hit, and I went back in my seat and I looked up, I saw a light in the window, which I tell people I think was a great metaphor for me. I knew I had a shot, but I wasn't out because if you saw how the plane landed, the bottom of the plane was stripped, and somebody actually did listen to the flight crew, went to that closest exit, which may be behind you, and tried to open up that door. Water started coming in immediately from underneath and the back of the plane. So the plane was filling up with water pretty rapidly. Where I was at 15A, which is 4 rows behind the left wing, but the water was somewhere between the knee and the waist level at that point. The further back you got was higher, the further forward you got was less, because if you saw the plane was sitting in the river, the back of the plane was already submerged in the water. So I was already in the water, so I didn't have hope at that point. Because my game plan, Darren, was get to the aisle, get up, and get out, because I didn't want to be drowned in a plane.
Right.
Because the water's coming in rapidly, and people. And that's when the term that I used that night on CBS in the interview that I did with Katie Couric was controlled chaos. That no one lost their heads, no one was pushing people out of the way. There's nothing like that, but there were people moving fast and people moving with purpose. So no one was waiting around to say, all right, let's wait for someone to come in and get us. It's time to get out.
But despite you're about to, and I'm hearing stories about, and we're right in the middle of this flooding, and just, so there have been a lot of thoughts we've been having here about the idea of drowning, like in a
Yep.
flood, and encouraging people to stay out of their attics, go to your roof. I mean, just that thought of drowning is so terrifying. And yet you were the last one off the plane.
Yeah, the last passenger off the plane. Captain Sullenberger was technically the last person off the plane. I was the last passenger, but that wasn't by design. Because my game plan, once we got down, was get to the aisle, get up, and get out. I mean, that's exactly what I thought. But what happened to me, Darren, was something that I think not only changed that day, but probably changed where I was going to head the rest of my life. Is my mom, who had passed away in 1997, kicked into my head and started talking to me. And what I heard her tell me in my head was, if you do the right thing, God will take care of you. And I tell people, one of the great things about my mother was she'd give you a choice. She wouldn't tell you what to do. She would give you a choice and make you make the decision. And hopefully your value sets would help you make the right decision. But my decision was to go towards the back of the plane because I knew that I was alive. And, I grew up in playing sports and athletics and Boy Scouts and teams. And, I was always, when I grew up, all the guys had each other's backs, so I went to the back of the plane because I knew I was alive. I didn't know anybody back there needed help. So I got in the back of the plane to see if anybody needed help. And if you saw the movie, the elderly lady who was in the wheelchair, if you saw that lady in the movie, that person didn't want to go. She was like sitting there. And so finally 2 ladies, and I was behind them. It's like, let's go. Let's move. So they got her up and we started pushing her towards the front of the plane. And I was behind them, walking behind them up the aisle as they were taking that lady up out of the plane. And when I got to the exit door on the right, and I tried to get out, I looked out the door, and there was no room on the wing or the boat for me. So I looked out, and there's nothing there. So that's why I was inside the plane, waist deep in the 36-degree water for about 7 minutes, holding on to the lifeboat, because the lifeboat kept floating out to the river, and they kept yelling, hold on, because they, like all of us who reads the brochure, the instructions, is tethered to the plane. But no one knows that when all the stuff's breaking loose. So I held on to the little lifeboat, waist deep in 36-degree water inside the plane, and that's how I became the last passenger off the plane.
Whew, 36 degrees. Probably weren't feeling a whole lot at that point. So, yeah, go ahead.
No, I said you're exactly right. A little bit different than what's going on in Houston, where it's pretty warm water, but they're having a very similar situation with water rushing in very quickly.
Indeed. So now take us from that point where you had stepped off the plane to where you really started to get that clarity about this newfound sense of purpose. You know, you've gone from now you're pretty convinced that this is the end, and you are making your peace with God. You are confessing, any hidden faults before God, and then you land. There's the fear of potentially drowning, and there's just this controlled chaos to get off the plane, and you started to have that glimmer of hope. But then at some point it occurred to you that this is going to be a significant part of my life's message from this point on.
Yeah, we're still a little bit away from that, because I had to swim to the ferry because I felt the plane shake because the tugboat hit the front of the plane as it was backing out with passengers. And the first thing I thought was Titanic. So I thought the plane was going down. And my thought was, man, don't be sucked down in a plane. You know, you're almost out of this thing. Don't be sucked down in a plane. So I jumped in and swam to the closest ferry, which was at the end of the wing. Finally had two guys help me get on the ferry. And that's the moment I thought, man, I made it. You know, I made it. But all of a sudden, what happens is all that adrenaline that you have to get out, that you don't feel anything, all of a sudden all that cold kicked in, because it was 11 degrees air temperature, 36-degree water temperature. I've been in the water for 7+ minutes. I was so cold. That's the moment actually I thought, I'm not going to make it. And I give the example of what you see, you know, these pictures of these firemen, and I do a lot of talks for firemen, where the pictures of the firemen are rushing into the fire, right? They have all their equipment, they're rushing in, and the next picture you see of the fireman is him sitting or her sitting on the curb, right? They have no energy left because they've given it all, and that's exactly what I felt. I was like, I have nothing left, and I was so cold, I'm not going to make it. Now I'm going to die of being cold. But fortunately for me, that didn't happen. It got me to shore. And that's when two EMTs and a gentleman from the American Red Cross with a blanket were there to help me. And that's why I speak so passionately for the Red Cross, because they were there that day, on the New Jersey side where I was, but also on the New York side. But then I go to the triage center, and they stripped all my clothes off, and now I'm in my underwear. And now a guy comes up with a card and says, I need your name and date of birth. And I give it to him, and he walks away. And the only thing and puts a tag on my right foot. And the only thing I could put together with that is the TV show MASH, where they tagged your toe and you're dead. And I thought I was dead again. I'm like, I didn't make it. Maybe all this is like that movie Ghost, where it's true. You're watching yourself die and you're talking and no one's answering. It's like, I didn't make it. I really am dead. But then the EMT comes back and takes your blood pressure. And, it's like, good, I got blood pressure, but it's 190/120. So now you got another problem. You have a heart attack or a stroke, she goes. So then they take you to the hospital really quick, and they start working on you. So I didn't really understand. I'm really not telling this whole backstory to tell you really every detail, but what happened was I didn't know until probably a couple hours after that, after I made it, I was in the hospital, I knew I was going to be alive, that, you know what, my life's really going to change now. And whether it changes, a different direction, or what I'm going to do something different in my career or whatever. But that's when it started changing. I said, you know what, my whole life, this was a defining moment in my life, because I survived a plane crash. And we worked together as a team to get this thing done. And all of a sudden, my life's going to change. And that was the moment, I think, is in the hospital bed.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, after nearly having impact on the ground, you could have died that way. You could have died drowning. You could have died of hypothermia. You could have died of, heart complications, or just, things that that kind of trauma would have triggered. And then in the hospital, that's when you really got some time to start to process what had just happened to you. My goodness.
Yeah.
And were there any other thoughts you had, any of other sort of, God consciousness about that God was involved in the situation, that God was near you, or did it just kind of feel like you only kind of sensed that in retrospect? Or how much of a God consciousness did you have in the midst of that?
Well, when I prayed, I knew God's hands were on it, and that was the first magazine interview I did was with a guy by the name of Rick Warren, and it was about how God's hands were on us the entire time. Where you're not thinking about it, but you got that presence of feeling that I said my piece. If I go, I go. If I don't, hopefully I'll do something better with my life. But I knew that God's hands were on this because there's too many things happening in the right way. In normal crisis situations, which were like even what we're seeing now in Houston, there's a lot of things happening the right way, but there's a lot of things happening in the wrong way. That day on the plane, everything really happened for the right way. Whether it was the right captain, the right seats, the right passenger makeup of the plane, the ferries being there in 2 minutes, right? I mean, it was just so many things that happened right. So I knew God's hands were on it. And so I show a picture when I speak there of God's hands holding the plane up till all the passengers get off, and then he lets it go. Just drops it, right? Because I think that my personal belief is God wanted to make a stand and a message with this. There are so many negative things happening in the country. There's so much negativity, but all of a sudden you have a captain, a crew, and passenger do something that had never been done before, and God's hands were on it. And maybe God was saying, "I'm still here." If I have to show you in the busiest place in the world at rush hour, at the busiest time in the world, that I am still here, I'll do something big. And I think this was a statement from the higher being saying, you know what, you got to believe because there's better things ahead. If you believe in me and what's going on. So if I physically show you that, I'll show you that.
And because you were just right in the middle of that you got an even greater sense of that. I mean, it's just absolutely unmistakable. I can only imagine actually walking away from something like that, to just have this deep conviction of the power and the sovereignty of God. And so you moved on from that point, committed to helping others really capitalize and really have the right perspective on the adversities, probably a lot of adversity. You're speaking to people, firemen, you're speaking to people that have gone through very traumatic circumstances. What are some of the things that you say to the people that you're speaking to?
Well, it depends on the audience, but one of the things I'm most passionate about right now, and one of the reasons I did a TED Talk in Canada earlier this year was one thing I've realized is there's a lot of people who go through a traumatic life event, whatever that is, who go into a depressed state. See, Darren, I've had the honor and privilege of going to places like Fort Hood over in Texas. I got to go to Oklahoma after the tornadoes a few years ago, and I got to go to the eastern shore of North Carolina after Superstorm Sandy. And I'm probably making a trip to Houston or South Texas area here in the next year. And because I get a chance to talk to people. And what I find out is people like me who are in the middle of it, most of us, get taken care of. But a lot of times people go into a depressed state. So one of my big messages now is not only telling them about the miracle, it's about how can you actually grow from a traumatic life event instead of going to a depressed state. And that term is called PTGS, post-traumatic growth syndrome. And I didn't know what it meant at first, but I was approached to do an interview by AARP magazine now 3 years ago now. And candidly, I did not know why they wanted to interview me. I didn't even know what AARP was. I thought I was too young for it anyway, right? I was a young guy, but here's AARP calling me. But they found out that I helped raise over $12 million for the American Red Cross, and they want to know the strategies I used to grow from this thing called a plane crash, why so many other passengers went into a depressed state and needed therapy. And they told me this phrase called PTGS, and they said, you are the example of PTGS, and we want to write about it and help people learn how to grow from this. So I did this interview and shared some of the strategies that I used to grow from a plane crash, and which now I talk to firemen and military, and hopefully I'll talk to some people who have gone through what's going on now, and people have gone through avalanches over in the Himalayas, who have a challenging situation, and I share these strategies with them. And that's one of my big missions now is to get this message out so people can get out of PTSD or even depression, whatever they want to call it. But that's part of my messaging right now.
Wow. So it actually reminds me, are you familiar with Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl?
Yes, I am. I actually wrote a blog about it.
Wow. I mean, your story sounds so similar. I mean, for those who aren't aware, Viktor Frankl went through the Holocaust during World War II, the Nazi Holocaust, and he was a psychiatrist, and he studied those before going through the Holocaust, in the midst of the Holocaust, and then their experience with reintegration into society following the Holocaust. And that sense of meaning was the defining factor in whether or not a person would not decide first not to take their life, that they wouldn't just live in a pit of despair, but that they would move on and do something great with their lives. And that's exactly what you've done. And I love that acronym, PTGS. I'd never actually heard of that. So that's that's like a clinical concept
Right.
that's being talked about now.
Yeah, what I found out when I did this interview is that there were two studies being done about this subject, one at North Dakota State University and one at UNC Charlotte, and they used me as an example, and that's how AARP found who I was. And so I finally started putting the pieces of the pie together, and they're doing studies on how do people grow from this, because there's so many people that go just to the opposite direction. Even what happened to Miracle on the Hudson, there were people who, as even you saw in the movie Sully, the Captain Sullivan went through PTSD, and we knew something was going on with him because he just didn't seem jovial when we were around him, but no one knew to the extent until I think the movie really came out. But yeah, it's called PTGS, post-traumatic growth syndrome, and it's something now that's being studied, and hopefully I can add value. And my TED Talk is called Bouncing Back, a personal experience with PTGS on TED Talk. So if people want to hear more about that, they can check that out on TED Talk.
Wow, excellent. Well, for those who are maybe they haven't yet gone through, why don't we start there with those who have not yet gone through one of these traumatic circumstances? What would somebody need to do in order to be prepared to walk through that with boldness and with victory?
Well, one of the things I talk about is, those who have the humility to prepare will have the confidence to execute when their moment comes, and their moment will come. Darren, whether it's you, me, anybody, everybody in their life is going to face this personal plane crash. Something's going to happen. Right now, the people in Houston and South Texas are facing their personal plane crash. So I tell people, the way that I prepared for it, I don't think you can ever prepare when it's going to happen, but I learned, I invested in personal development. And some of the strategies that I used that day were probably two different things. Number one, state management, how to manage my mind when all stuff's breaking loose. And I share the strategies I learned on that, and I actually implemented that day. And the second thing is the term's called sensory acuity. How do you communicate in an effective manner in the modality that other people who are going through something are in, so you can get something accomplished? And people say, well, what's that? And I give them an example of the lady who was standing in the middle of the wing, and I was hanging out the door, and she had a baby, and she didn't know what to do, and she was stifled because she was so in herself, in kinesthetic. What am I going to do? So I had to do something radical to break her out of it. So I used a skill called sensory acuity, which I broke her pattern by yelling something very crazy at her. I yelled her, throw the baby, and broke her pattern of she looked at me, and I got her attention. Somebody else got the baby, and she got off the wing into the lifeboat. So I tell people that, I don't know if you can ever prepare for a situation, but you can prepare yourself by learning these skills. And this is some of the things that I teach right now is about these skill sets on how to prepare for that time that's going to come.
Beautiful. And DaveSandersonSpeaks.com is the place where people can go. Is that the best place?
Yeah, DaveSandersonSpeaks.com is the first best place to go. If you want to get any information, of course, Facebook on Dave Sanderson Speaks is my Facebook page, or LinkedIn at David Sanderson, or Twitter at Dave Sanderson too. But they can check me out there. But I also like to offer something that, if you want to check out some more information around some of these topics, just text 797979 and put brace the number 4 impact, and I'll send you free the first video of my new video series that you'll get to hear, and sort of some of the strategies that we used that day as my gift to you for listening to Darren and I today.
Excellent. Can you give us that number again?
Text brace, BRACE 4, the number 4 impact, brace 4 impact to that number, and then you'll get a free video, the first video of my new video series, which will be going out this fall.
Excellent. Well, if people didn't get a chance to write that down because you're driving or whatever, we'll make sure that that's in the show notes for you. Uh, and also tell us about the Red Cross and the work you're doing there, and maybe how somebody could get involved with Hurricane Harvey here in Houston.
Well, I appreciate that because I'm really passionate. Like I mentioned, one of the first three people I saw when I hit shore in New Jersey were two EMTs and a gentleman from the American Red Cross. So I became a national spokesperson for the American Red Cross, speaking all over the country, helping them raise much needed funds, which everybody across the country, is going to face something. Right now, unfortunately, it's Texas. And, one of the things that happened is about 3 months ago in April, I spoke in South Padre Island and in Harlingen for two Red Cross fundraisers, where the hurricane hit. Hit right at Rockport, which is a little north of where that is. So I actually spoke there and got to meet the people there. So I have an affinity on what's going on with the folks in South Texas right now. So I would say right now the best way you can get involved is donate a few dollars here or there, because right now they need money for supplies to help people. Because you see that they need boats, they need extra. General Honore came out today and said he'd recommend more helicopters and more boats to get these people moved, and that takes money and finances. And the Red Cross is one of the best ways be able to use money, because they can multiply money pretty quickly on how they do things. So I would, if you go to my website, DaveSandersonSpeaks.com, go to the link, my Red Cross link. I have money right now targeted to disaster services, so it goes directly to the disaster services and what's going on in Texas. It won't go to any place else, because I would really encourage people to donate whatever you can, $1, $5, $10, because every dollar adds up. And once again, they can multiply dollars like nobody's business. And one of the great things about the Red Cross, as you're finding out in Houston right now, Darren, is they know how to do logistics. They knew how to move things quickly, even in places where they can't move things quickly. So no, I'm passionate about this, and if anybody can do that, I'd really that would not only mean a lot to me, but I know a lot to the people in Houston, because Darren's sitting in the middle of it now. He's not as affected, it sounds like, as some people, but there's a lot of pain going on now. It's going to take a lot of time and money to get that area back to where it needs to be, and every little bit helps.
Yeah, Dave, it's interesting right now. I'm looking out at my street and I can see the street starting to fill up with water, because the water from up north is being released into through our drains. Just, I guess, to give some relief. They've been releasing dams into certain areas that aren't as bad. Of course, that people are having to get evacuated out of those places as well. So we don't know what is to come, but it certainly is bad and much worse in other areas. But this talk has definitely been very inspiring for me, being here on the ground, because it's going to be, these places are underwater, and it's going to be a long journey ahead. And, this is a business podcast, I think about companies like HEB, and this is, Yep. Company founded with Christian owners, Christian founders, Christian principles, and these businesses, as business leaders, we are put in these places for a reason, and whatever resources we have. I mean, HEB has got, at the same time, multiple stores underwater, and then at the same time they've got the other stores that are being depended on for the disaster relief. And so what would be your parting advice to business leaders on this topic of defining moments when it comes to, maybe they're not in the midst of a disaster zone, but these defining moments are happening every day? What would be your parting piece of advice?
Well, I appreciate that, because what we're finding out, you're seeing the best of people right now. Your company, whether it's my company, little company, or a bigger company, every one of our companies is going to be affected by something, and whether it's your location, geography, or store, or some people. And I would say, just remember, be there for your people. And the best companies that I've been around are there for their associates in time of need. And I'll give you, just to end up with, to give you a couple examples. What I learned when I got back to Charlotte, and went to my church that weekend, and the lady who was in charge of Wachovia, who is now Wells Fargo, her bank's emergency response goes to my church, and she came up to me just crying and saying, "I wish I knew you were there, because I would have put you on our company plane." And I didn't even know that the companies were flying planes up because I was injured in the hospital. But what I found out from her and Bank of America and LendingTree and some of these other companies, they had people as part of the Miracle on the Hudson that they were left there, and their companies flew their private planes up to go get their employees. Mm-hmm. They were there for them in their time of need. So I would say, tell these companies, every company could be affected by something, whether it's local or it's distant. Be there for your employees. Have compassion, because every one of your associates will go through a personal plane crash, a challenge in their life, whether it's a car accident, a personal, situation, a heart attack, a flood, a fire, whatever it may be. You can make raving fans out of your customers by doing, or by your associates by doing that. If the company I was with had done that for me, I'd still be with that company, and I'd be their biggest ombudsman out there talking about it. But they unfortunately weren't there for me as much as I needed them to be there. So I moved on. So the people who are a part of the Miracle on the Hudson are still with their companies because of the way their companies took care of them. So take care of your associates in their time of need.
Wow. That's a great parting piece of advice. DaveSandersonSpeaks.com is the website, and you can also link to the American Red Cross to get involved with what's happening here in Houston. If you're wanting more information, you can also email us at CCB, as in Center for Christianity and Business, at hbu.edu. We can check that email. The school has obviously experienced a lot of flooding, especially that southern part of Houston. But we'll make sure that you get a response. And if there's something that there's some way that you can help out, we'll definitely try to figure out how to make sure you can do that. Dave, thank you for the work that you're doing, for your message, and we just celebrate the miracle that you are, and the miracles that you will continue to help God to facilitate in our world to redeem these tragic situations that are all around us.
Thank you very much, Darren. May God bless you. May God bless your audience.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and if so, we would greatly appreciate it if you would leave us a quick rating and review for the Christianity and Business podcast on iTunes. You can get more information about HBU Center for Christianity and Business at christianityandbusiness.com. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep integrating biblical values into your business.